Is that in working order, Ray? I guess it is. Well, I'm so happy to find a group at Augsburg that's interested in this field of parapsychology. There's a growing interest, I think, in the country of various types and various levels, and I hope that in your seminars, your 3 seminars, you will approach it with first an open mind, and secondly, with the absence of gullibility, both. That is, how does one combine an open mind, open to new experiences, not trying to shut them out? That's very difficult. And at the same time, not be naive, you see, about one's experiences. I think this is one of the basic problems of parapsychological investigation. I thought I would talk for a few minutes this evening, not more than a half hour, and then we'll have a little period for give and take. And my task, as I see it this evening, is to outline some of the problems in clarifying our conceptions of this field and to attempt to suggest the terms, some of the important terms that you use in this area. I'd like to do this in the following way. I'd like, first of all, to distinguish between parapsychological research, as it's called, and religions. Make a clear distinction between the two. That's point 1. I'd like point 2 to suggest some of the types of phenomena that we talk about in this broad area of parapsychology. Then I like in point 3 to distinguish between 2 important methods, each of which has its place of study, 2 important methods of study. That's my 3rd point. And then my 4th point will be to illustrate what in modern times we call the experimental method. I brought along some cards to just show you how the experimenters work so that you can carry on some of the experiments among yourselves, along with many other fascinating things that I'm sure the 3 groups will be talking about. Let me repeat, of course, that in a few moments I can only raise a few questions. That's about all. And if you raise some others in turn, I'll be satisfied. I'll turn then to the first point. I think we ought always to keep in mind a distinction between religions and cults, C-U-L-T-S, on the one hand, and investigation of psychical things on the other. Religions and cults, as I'm using the term here, mean that you already have a commitment to a certain thing, you see. You believe a certain thing. And you make a creed about it. The spiritualists, for example, believe their central religious belief, the so-called spiritualist church. The central religious belief of the spiritualist church is that spiritualists can get in touch with spirits, that is, spirits of dead people, who are communicating with them, you see. This is a belief. There's no question about it among spiritualists. They wouldn't be a spiritualist unless they believed that, you see. So they aren't asking, is it possible to get in touch with spirits? They're telling us it is, you see. That's important, because this is the way I'm using the term religion or cult. On the one hand, there are certain groups known as theosophical groups. Theosophy, which was started by Mrs. Annie Besant in the latter part of the 19th century. Now, the theosophists call themselves a religion. Theosophy, wisdom about God, you see. And they have a set of beliefs to which they are committed. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong about this. I'm trying to distinguish, you see, cults and religions on the one hand from, on the other hand, what we might call open-ended investigation, you see. cults and religions on the one hand from open-ended investigation on the other. Another example of a cult, I suppose, would be the astrological cult. You've all heard a lot about astrologists. They don't ask themselves, do the planets influence our lives? They tell us that the planets do, you see. So that the question is closed for them at that point, you see. And I think it's very important, whatever you think about religions and cults on the one hand, and open-ended study or investigation on the other, whichever you're doing, to keep them distinct, you see. Don't confuse them. You hear today many people talk, for example, about the occult. And quite often what they mean when they use that term occult is religions which have particular beliefs, or cults which have particular beliefs. And they're not talking about open-ended investigation or study. Now, you may be doing something of both. You may be studying the religions that have definite beliefs, or the cults, like astrology, spiritualism, theosophy, and so on. You may well do that. You may be interested in studying them. But don't confuse them, you see, with what we would call psychical research, on the other hand, which is an attempt to discover what is taking place in this realm of the parapsychological. And there may be many alternative theories as to what is taking place given certain experiences, you see. Well, that's my first point then. I hope you keep that distinction clear then. Now, in the second point, I'd like to remind us, and I understand that some of you will be reading Gardner Murphy's book. This will all be laid out in Gardner Murphy. But let's remind ourselves of some of the alleged phenomena that occur in this area of the psychic, as we call it. We start over here, perhaps, with inspiration. Inspiration is a type of phenomenon that we might want to study. The inspiration of the poet or the scientist. It's very peculiar. We don't know much about it, you see. We've all had experiences that are called by the French term déjà vu. I have been there before. Perhaps you've had experiences like that, in which you suddenly turn around a corner and see a place in a strange city and say, well, I've been here before, but I can't remember when it was, even though you don't know that you've been in this city before, you see. These experiences are very common, and again, we don't know very much about them, you see. You move over a little bit on the sliding scale, so to speak, and we've all heard of the mystical experiences of certain great religionists, in which they claim to have certain experiences of union with God. Somehow those things seem to be connected, but you see, we don't have any final explanation yet. We don't know what's taking place, except that something out of the ordinary is taking place. We can say that, but what it is, you see, we don't profess to know. We're trying to find out what's happening. Or, and you move over a little bit further, and you have experiences that are called telepathic, seem to be telepathic. That is to say, far feeling. The term telepathy, you see, far feeling, was coined in about 1902 to represent what seems to be taking place when I communicate with you without the use of sense experience, without the five senses. In other words, it takes at least two people to have telepathic experiences. It's important to keep that in mind because often telepathic experiences are confused with the next type of extrasensory experience that I want to note, clairvoyant experiences. C-L-A-I-R-V-O-Y-A-N-T. Now this again is a French word. Obviously those of you who know your French know what it means. Clear seeing. You see, clear seeing. Now in a clear seeing experience, supposedly, you can see an object at a distance without sense, without your eyes or your ears or your nose or anything else. And supposedly no one is sending you this message, you see. You simply see a dead cat in Mankato, you see. You stand here and suddenly you jump. And you say, I see a dead cat in front of the First National Bank at Mankato. And the president of the bank is sitting on the dead cat, let's say. Well, now what a strange experience, if you should have an experience of that kind. And later on, you get a telephone call from your friend in Mankato saying that for some reason he sat on that dead cat precisely when you saw him sitting on it. Now, the only difficulty you see about the distinction between a telepathic and a clairvoyant experience is to differentiate them. We can't always do that, you see. You don't know whether it's telepathic or clairvoyant. Suppose, for example, that the president of the First National Bank who was sitting on the dead cat was trying to communicate with you at that point. It would have been a telepathic experience. Now, why would he want to communicate with you? I don't know. But stranger things have happened. So that in that case, you see, it might have been either a clairvoyant or a telepathic experience. I had a teacher called me, and some of you heard this incident, but I'll repeat it just to illustrate the difficulty again, last year and tell me that she was teaching school in St. Paul. She suddenly found the class blotted out in front of her. She couldn't see the class anymore. Instead, she saw in quotation marks, she saw her husband pinned under an automobile at such and such an avenue in Minneapolis, that foreign city. And he was in agony. He obviously was in an automobile accident, you see, she said. And she said the vision made such an impression on her that she immediately stopped teaching class and went to the principal's office. And there she asked the principal, has anyone called you about an accident to my husband? No call has come in. Well, I'll go back and start teaching again, she said. So she began to try to teach again in her classroom. But 4 minutes later, the door opened, and the secretary to the principal came into her room and said they just had a call from Swedish Hospital that her husband was in such and such a room. He'd been in an automobile accident, and they described the scene just as she had seen it, you see, including the avenue where the accident had occurred, you see. Well, here you get, you see, a problem. She said, do these things happen? She said, I'm all shaken up, she told me over the telephone. Well, who wouldn't be shaken up by this kind of an experience? Of course they happen. There are many cases of this kind, you see. But you'll notice in this particular case, you can't say authoritatively whether it was telepathic or clairvoyant, can you? Her husband may there, you see, have been in pain, and might have been saying, well, I'd like to get in touch with my wife. And sure enough, he did. That would have been a telepathic experience. On the other hand, maybe he wasn't even trying to, either subconsciously or consciously. Instead, she had a clairvoyant experience of seeing the wreck with his body under the car, you see. So it could be interpreted either way. We don't know in a situation like that. Well, we move over along the scale and we get to experiences that are sometimes called precognitive. That is, you foresee something in the future. And you foresee it, as the technical term is, non-inferentially. Non-inferentially. That's a term I think you ought to get acquainted with. You all know what it means. In a scientific experiment, we can predict certain things inferentially, you see. That is to say, we've experimented with H2O many times. If you put together 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen, we can say, if you'll do this in the future, you'll get water, you see. But that would not be regarded as a precognitive experience, you see, because you're inferring from previous experience what's going to happen, you see. That's an inferential prediction. A non-inferential prediction would be regarded as precognitive. Some of you recall the terrible Welsh mine disaster of a few years ago, 2 years ago I believe it was, when a whole mountain caved in, you remember, and crushed children, school children, as they were coming out of school, killing, I think, something like 70. Well, it happens that a great many people, several weeks before, throughout England and Wales, had dreamed precognitive, what seemed to have been precognitive dreams. Some of the dreams going into great detail about the number of children, the nature of the hill, the kind of schoolhouse from which they were emerging. All these details were in some of the dreams, you see. These dreams then would be regarded, presumably, as non-inferential predictions, precognitive predictions, you see. Because as far as I know, none of the people who dreamed the dreams knew anything about this town in Wales, you see, at all. There was nothing on which they could build, presumably, in their previous experience. So it would be non-inferential prediction, you see. Now, there have been some very remarkable precognitive experiments. I might have time in a moment to refer to them. But I want us to get over some of the types of experiences that you'll be looking at and trying to understand, seeing whether you can explain them. Because I hope, among other things that you may do in your groups, that you will try to raise this question of how do you explain things of this kind, you see. Now here again is the difference between cults and some religions, you see, over here, which claim to have answers, definite answers, you see, which become a part of their faith, and open-ended study. On the other hand, keep in mind that this is an important distinction. Now we move over, we get to what are called out-of-the-body experiences. Precognitive and then out-of-the-body experiences. In a typical out-of-the-body experience, you are lying on your bed, and suddenly you have the experience of looking down on your body. Have you ever had that? Some of you will. In a group this size, at least one of you probably will have this experience at some time. Some of the out-of-the-body experiences, of course, become very complicated. You not only look down on your body, but you have the feeling that you're going through the door. The door gives way even though it doesn't open. You go right through it. You go down to Mankato, let's say. You see this bank president sitting on this cat, let's say, and see all the circumstances down there. I don't know why I invented that case, you see, but this is not an untypical out-of-the-body experience. And then you have the feeling of being pulled back to your body by a long string that stretches way down to Mankato. This is the way these experiences are described quite frequently. A cord seems to attach you in Mankato to your body here in Minneapolis. And the cord seems to be elastic. And when you come back to your body, the way many of these experiences are described, the cord seems to flop, you know, as a rubber band would flop, and suddenly you're back in your body. You can no longer look down on it, you see. Now what is it? What is it? I recently had another lady call me and describe what seemed to be an out-of-the-body experience. You see, in the spirit of the way I interpret this area, we could never say was an out-of-the-body experience. All you can say is it seemed to be, it appeared to be, you see. And this was her experience. She said she lay down on her bed one Wednesday evening, and she had the experience that she was looking down on her body. And you know, in this halfway stage between sleep and wakefulness that all of us have had, this is the time, you know, when you sometimes some of your most interesting insights into yourself are raised, isn't it? Or so it seems to me, at least. At any rate, she was looking down at her body, and she said suddenly she seemed to go outside the room, and she was behind an apartment building in Minneapolis. And she saw the garbage cans lined up behind the apartment building, as you know. You've all seen garbage cans behind apartment buildings in Minneapolis. But the strange thing that she saw was a woman's purse opened right behind one of the garbage pails, and an identification card was falling out of the woman's purse, along with all the other things women carry in purses, you know, and they carry a lot of things, and she saw them all very vividly. And she looked a little bit toward the side of the purse, and there she saw the body of a woman lying. And she knew that the purse belonged to the woman, she said, and that the woman had been murdered. Well, then she had the experience of coming back to her body, and the next morning, the first thing she did was to describe her experience to her husband, who, of course, poo-pooed it. But then a half hour later, they were listening to the radio, and a report came in that a woman's body had been discovered that morning, about the time she apparently had had her vision, behind such and such an apartment building. Her purse was found open, and it was believed by the police that she had been murdered, and they gave her name, you see. Well, this lady was terribly disturbed, too. She says, I've never had anything like this before in my experience. You know, what am I to make of it? Well, I tried to tell her what some of the framework of experience of this sort had been. But again, you see, there are many theories to try to explain phenomena of this kind. I hope you get into them. It's very exciting, you see, because we really don't know how to account for these things. Now we move over to another kind of experience, what some people call telekinetic experiences, or psychokinesis. Telekinesis or psychokinesis. The apparent capacity of the psyche to influence the way that cards fall, or any other physical object. Do we have the capacity, do our psyches have the capacity to influence the way physical objects fall? Well, Louisa Rhine, who's the wife of Dr. J.B. Rhine, who used to be at Duke University, has written a whole book on that subject called Mind Over Matter. And you're reading, I believe, one of the Rhine's books for these classes. At any rate, she describes the experiments that took place for about 30 years at Duke University in this area. And she concludes that there is no doubt in her judgment, but what apparently we do under certain circumstances have the power to do this. It's closely related to what we might call poltergeist phenomena. Poltergeist. G-E-I-S-T, of course the German for spirit. And in a poltergeist phenomenon, of course, what might happen would be that chair would suddenly lift itself up and fall on your head, you see here, with no visible support. Or would go up to the ceiling and just hang there, hanging on nothing, let's say. Or this would rise. This, of course, has happened many times in various types of experiences where the table will rise and sometimes dance a jig on the floor, for example. What causes these things? You see, the question is not do they occur. That's not the question anymore. I think anyone who goes through the voluminous studies of psychical research cannot doubt what they occur. The lives of the saints, for example, are full of examples of this kind. One interesting project some of you might want to do this term for your seminar would be get down a good hagiography, you know, a good life of the saints, and see how frequently the saints sometimes, for example, are sitting on their chairs, and suddenly they find themselves lifted up with no visible support, and they sit up here. Now, why this should happen, I don't know. But that's a mark of a saint, you see, when this happens. Some of you may be saints someday. In other words, these phenomena go far back over history, but we don't know how to explain them, you see, yet. That's why groups like yours are getting together all over the country, you see, to discuss this question and to see what kinds of explanations we can develop. That's the exciting thing. You see, it's a big adventure, trying to understand the human personality or the human mind. Well, at any rate, we have this whole area of phenomena. One observation that some have made is that usually there's a teenager nearby when a poltergeist phenomenon occurs. There are various explanations for that. I'll leave it up to your discussion to see what connection you think there might be between the presence of a teenager and the appearance of a poltergeist. But it's one of the many questions you'll have to answer, you see, in a few weeks. And you have a big job before you. Now we move over a little bit further, and we get into such phenomena, for example, as alleged communication with the dead, you see. And there's a large body of literature dealing with this problem of alleged communication with the dead. You see, the spiritualist would say communication with the spirits. He knows, you see. The open-ended investigator will have to say presumed or alleged communication with the dead, you see, because he really doesn't pretend to know. He knows there are certain phenomena that he wants to investigate that seem to be or claim to be communication with the dead. But he has so many doubts and so many questions, you see, as to whether they can be explained by some other method, such as telepathy, that he cannot make a commitment to a belief system about that. Well, I hope that some of you, during the course of the discussion this term, will take a look at Harnell Hart, H-O-R-N-E-L-L, Harnell Hart, H-A-R-T. He was a great sociologist and died only about 3 years ago, called The Enigma of Survival. The Enigma of Survival. I don't know whether Augsburg has it in the library. I think, does it have it in the library? The public library should have it if Augsburg doesn't. I hope Augsburg has it because it's a very nice summary of evidence and arguments pro and con, you see. In other words, you get a debating format in Harnell Hart's book on the enigma of survival. And that's one reason I recommend it to you. Another one that you might want to look at is by C.J. Ducasse, D-U-C-A-S-S-E, called The Belief in Life After Death. I believe that's right. The Belief in Life After Death. And this is by a noted philosopher who also died only about 3 years ago. And again, is a very well presented argument and analysis, you see, together with whatever evidence we seem to have, you see, in this difficult area of investigating alleged survival. Well, over here on the other extreme, then you have a growing or renewed interest in, today, for example, in the ancient doctrine of reincarnation. You know, the idea that I am in quotes, a body now, and you are a physical body, but that you've perhaps had many bodies during the course of your pilgrimage in the universe. You see, that you are not your body. You are something else, and you just slough aside bodies, you see, as you develop as a human being, you see. And you know, when you come to think of it, that's not so strange. The physiologists tell us that we discard most of our bodies during our lifetimes, 7 or 8 times, don't we? We're always sloughing off cells, getting new cells. What do I have in common with the picture of myself at the age of a month? You see, I say that's I. It doesn't look like me. You see, we've already cast off several bodies since then, so is it any stranger to believe that if we cast off our body for the final time when we go to the cemetery, that conceivably we take on another one, you see? That's the kind of question that students of reincarnation are investigating, and that one of the leading students today is Dr. Eon Stevenson, S-T-E-V-E-N-S-O-N, who is a medical scientist. He's professor of neurology at the University of Virginia Medical School, and his best book is 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. You can get that again from the American Society for Psychical Research. Well, I've tried to give you some impression, you see, about the range of phenomena. In between someplace here are the phenomena that we call apparitions, or ghosts. Again, I think if you're open-minded and look at the evidence, you can't deny that people have seen ghosts, in quotes, you see. Even animals have seen them. But how you explain them, this is very wide open. You see, we have various theories to explain them. And Tyrrell's little book, Tyrrell, G-N-M Tyrrell, his little book on apparitions is one of the most interesting, I think, in the effort to evaluate evidence and to develop an explanation for the appearance of ghosts. Well, I'm sure that in your 3 classes, the professors with whom you're going to be working will go off into many other areas too, but I've tried to sketch out, you see, some of the kinds of questions that you ought to be looking for. I haven't even mentioned healing phenomena, the alleged capacity of the psyche to heal physical disease, for example, and many other questions of that kind. Now I come to my 3rd point. I'm going to wind up my next 2 points in the next 3 minutes. My 3rd point has to do with two ways of investigating psychic phenomena, you see. And it's important to keep them in mind. In one method, we speak of spontaneous cases, the accurate reporting of spontaneous cases. And the other method we call the experimental method. Now, it's evident, I think, what either of the two are. The reason I mention them is because people get them mixed up sometimes. And they take sides. In psychical research, there are a lot of people who line up and say, what we need is more spontaneous cases. And another group will say, no, what we need is more experimentation. We don't want any more spontaneous cases. Away with them, or so on, you see. Well, this is a foolish quarrel, as most of these quarrels are, of course. But let me suggest what the problem of the spontaneous case is. The spontaneous case occurs, of course, if I'm sitting over here, and a ghost suddenly comes in the door, you see. And this has happened on many occasions. It seems to me to be a ghost, and I recognize a friend of mine coming in the door, who has been dead 20 years. You see. I say, hello. He says, he doesn't say anything, but he walks across and takes a seat here, you see. Now, this would be a spontaneous case. In other words, I haven't set it up. I'm not experimenting with it, you see. In fact, I didn't even expect it. Or the case of the teacher in St. Paul would be a spontaneous case. Or when you lift up the telephone, you say, oh, I know that's going to be Aunt Bessie. And sure enough, it's Aunt Bessie, you see. You've probably had that kind of an experience sometimes. Now, the difficulty about spontaneous cases, there are a number of difficulties in analyzing spontaneous cases. One is, of course, to report them accurately, you see. Any of you who studied psychology know how difficult it is to get two people to describe the same event in the same way, you see. Well, here it's very, very difficult, you see. So one of the problems with spontaneous cases is to get an accurate report. It ought to be written down immediately after it occurs, because memories fade. And many of these cases aren't, so you're suspicious of them, you see. Another problem, of course, with the spontaneous case is when you lift up the telephone, maybe Aunt Bessie, but maybe there were 10 times when it wasn't Aunt Bessie and you thought it was, you see. Now, is this simply chance then? Or is it beyond chance, you see? Well, it's questions like that that the experimenter tries to get at. In other words, he tries to exclude, as much as he can, chance explanations, you see, by setting up an experiment, a deliberate experiment, for, let's say, card guessing or something else of that sort, where he can determine the probabilities against chance by use of mathematics. Now, some of you studied or will study the mathematics of probability, and this is why it's good to have some mathematical background if you want to get into experimental work in ESP, you see. So there are these two types of investigation. They're both important. I want to suggest this. They're both very important. But some of you may be more interested in one type than you are in another type. Each has its own problems. The experimental problems, of course, have to do with your knowledge of mathematics. They have to do with your setting up the experiment so you can exclude as much as possible sense signals. There have been some experiments, for example, where they put people in steel enclosed rooms and then had them communicate between the room and the outside to be sure, you see, presumably no sense signals could go through the steel, presumably. Situations of this kind. They put concrete roofs over buildings because some people allege that there were signals coming in through the skylight or something of this sort, you see. In other words, you have to be very careful in setting up your experiment. And it's amazing the amount of care that's been exercised in some of those experiments. Well, you've all probably seen the ESP cards, which I brought along. I'm about to wind up my talk now. And the principle is, of course, the principle of tossing up a penny. Chances are, if you toss a penny up 1,000 times, heads will come up half the time and tails roughly the other half. It's the same principle of elaborate experiments in parapsychology in the last 30 years. These cards are obtainable, they're obtainable, I guess, down at the Gnostica bookstore, aren't they? With 5 different designs on, you see, instead of just 2 designs like heads and tails. But the principles of measuring, you see, of ruling out chance in guessing are roughly the same as if you're tossing up a penny. I've put on the board a simple illustration of how you check these cards, and I've tried to simplify it. Basically, this is what all the experiments use, you see. And let me go through it, and then I'll finish in 1.5 minutes now if I've gone through this. Suppose I tried to send the signal to you see, 16 packs of 25 each. That means that there are 5 of each kind, you see. There are 5 cards, 5 designs, and 5 of each. 5 wavy lines, 5 stars, 5 circles, 5 squares, and 5, what's the fourth? What's the other one? Forget my own cards, 5 pluses, you see. So there are 25 cards in a deck. Suppose you, in other words, you guess 16 packs of 25. That would be 400 trials. You see how you get that 16 times 20, 25. Now, if you guess correctly, 80. Suppose you make 80 correct guesses. That would only be chance, you see. If you guess 80 correctly, that would be chance expectation winning. See how you get that? 5 into 400, you see. Comes out with 80, like it's taking... That means, in other words, chance explanation could account for this many correct guesses. It's just like throwing up the coin again. Normally, 1/2 heads, 1/2 tails. Okay, do you follow it so far? Because I want to simplify it very much. It gets very complicated, but it needn't be complicated, you see. Chance expectation would be 80 correct guesses. Suppose now you have some parapsychological genius who guesses 160 correctly instead of 80. That's enormously good, as we'll see in just a moment. The deviation is 80. 160 minus 80. In other words, he guesses 80 more than chance would indicate that he would guess. You see, that's all we mean by the deviation. You follow it so far? Okay. Now, the standard deviation, they say, in a situation like this, that is, they give you some room, you see, for flexibility. The standard deviation is discovered by taking 4/10 of the square root of 400. 4/10 of the square root of the total number of trials. Well, the square root of 400 is what? 20. I invented it so it would come out easily, you see. 20 is the square root of 400. 4/10 of the square root of 400 would be 8. 4/10 of 20 is 8. Is that right? Okay. Thought you better check out one. Now, the critical thing is the critical ratio. How do you get the critical ratio? You take the total number, you take the deviation here, in this case it's 80. and you divide it by the standard deviation, you see, which is 8. And you get a critical ratio then of 10. That's known as the CR. When you look at experiments, you'll see these long tables, CR, so-and-so, and you say, well, what in heaven's name? You'll say, does this mean? Well, this is what it means. You see, this is how you get the CR. Now, the next step, the final step then, is to discover what this CR means. Now, the mathematicians of probability have worked out tables. You can get these tables at many different places. But I've indicated some of them here. The mathematicians of probability say that if you have a critical ratio of 2, we had one here of 10. If you have a critical ratio of 2, the odds that it is a chance explanation, the odds against its being a chance explanation, purely chance coincidence, you see, are 21 to 1. If you get only a critical ratio of 2. That's still doing pretty well, you see. The odds against chance are 21 to 1. If you have a critical ratio of 2.8, that's not very much more, is it? But look at how it changes the odds against chance, 195 to 1. See, it goes up very fast here. If you have a critical ratio of 3, the odds against chance are 370 to 1. Now, if you have a critical ratio of 8, the odds against chance are 8.3 times 10 to the 14th power against 1. Figure that out. You know your math, don't you? 10 taken 14 times 8.3 against 1, that this would be a chance explanation. Well, in our genius case, he got a critical ratio of 10. You see. This reduces the possibility of a chance explanation almost to the vanishing point, you see. You see why people enter experimental methods so they can rule out chance explanation, you see, because often people will say, oh yes, that was your Aunt Bessie, you got it once, but, you see. Well, that's why they're designing experiments. They have been for the last 40 years to, as nearly as possible, rule out explanations by chance. In the Soal experiments, S-O-A-L, which you'll read about, in precognition, the odds against chance were 1 billion, billion, billion against 1, you see. Now that's better than most scientific experiments, by far, you see. So that you have some very impressive experimental results in the investigation of ESP. Well, according to my clock, according to the official time, we have 6 minutes, 5.5.
Oh, we have at least that much time. I think we didn't set any closing time. I don't know how. I think you can indicate when we've gone on, long enough. But why don't we have some questions now?
I think break glass and cause hailstones.
Well, I don't know. It would depend upon the circumstance, but conceivably could be. It conceivably could be something resembling a poltergeist phenomenon, psyche over matter. You see.
The people that walk into a house and glass shatters, and a lot of times they're not conscious.
Oh, yeah. You usually aren't conscious. The teenager that's around is not conscious. But one explanation is that when you go through the teenage period, of course all of you are safely out that now, that you have unusual psychic tensions. Of course none of you did, but most teenagers do. And that these psychic tensions somehow have some effect. Now I say this is only one theory, one hypothesis. We don't know whether this is true, you see. But often there is a teenager around when the glass breaks or the hail comes, or a woman's hairbrush up on the 3rd story suddenly comes down the stairway and lands here. You see, this has happened, you see. Things of this sort. And instead of following the French and saying cherchez la femme, we have to say cherchez la teenager if some of these explanations are correct. The teenager may be abed sleeping, you see, and may be completely unconscious. But often he's there or she's there, you see.
What kind of evidence is there that you said animals have seen spirits? How is
Well, in Tyrell's book on apparitions, they study the Martin ghost, Morton. That's one ghost case that you'd find very interesting to study, and it's written up in a great many books. In the Martin ghost case, the ghost used to appear through the front door about 4:30 every afternoon, just about tea time. And of course people were there for tea, and suddenly the ghost would come in the door. And they had 2 or 3 dogs around, and just as people would see the ghost, the dogs would bark. And you know how a dog shivers when it sees a stranger. Simultaneously, when they would see the ghost, the dog would shiver or curl up, you know, in some way to indicate fright or puzzlement. And they infer that the dog must somehow have experienced the ghost because his shivering occurred about the same time they saw it. But you can't even prove that, you see. You have to infer that the dog, because you can't ask the dog, did you see the ghost? But they infer it, you see. This shows the difficulty of really saying anything certain about these experiences. But I hasten to add, if you come to think about it, how certain can you be about any experience? I see you sitting here only because I trust my eyes. Maybe I can't trust my eyes. How do you know that my eyes tell me anything about you? So that even in ordinary life, we build upon a series of faith propositions, don't we? We have faith that some kinds of perception tell us something and some kinds don't tell us anything. So that I'm not sure that the difficulty in this area is any greater than being certain about anything, you know, in life.
Not actually forbidden to ask a dog whether he's seen ghosts. The only problem is that in case you should ask him and he should reply to you in plain speech, that he might be humoring you.
Excellent. Well, I can see that you're going to have some fun with Mr. Anderson.
I wondered if there were any explanation to the psychic powers of Edgar Cayce.
There's been a lot of speculation. I understand you're going to be going into him to some degree in your seminars.
Well, I've read several of his books.
Uh-huh.
So very intriguing.
They are, aren't they? Yeah. Well, I know him chiefly through Sugrew's biography, There Is a River, and am very much impressed likewise by him. But he apparently had, see, I'm trying to guard myself against being a cultist. He apparently had telepathic capacity, clairvoyant capacity, and this peculiar capacity to diagnose illness, seemingly, you know, even though he had no medical training at all. Even giving the names of the bones in their Latin derivation in trance, even though when he was out of trance he knew nothing about the Latin words. You know. And there have been people who under trance have spoken in languages that they knew nothing about in conscious life, you see, including some ancient languages.
Exactly what is trance?
Well, again, we don't know exactly, you see. It seems to resemble something like a hypnotic state.
But it's not necessarily induced by something else.
No, you can, Casey used to induce it in himself. He put himself into trance. He would loosen his tie, lie down on the bed, and go into trance, you see. He had this capacity. And each of us has the capacity to some degree, and in some measure, to hypnotize himself. Maybe that's one of the things you ought to do this term, you know. Take instruction in self-hypnosis. You could do that. Put yourself in light hypnosis. You could probably do that. You could probably learn it if you wanted to.
Has there been study on the phenomena of sleeping because
Well, this resembles the glossolalia resembles the technical term in ESP is xenoglossy. You can see the resemblance between the two, speaking in foreign tongues. Well, there've been a lot of studies, not so much of speaking, not so much of glossolalia themselves, although there have been some studies there, but of this phenomenon of, for example, the modern young woman who began speaking in ancient Egyptian and spoke over a long period of time in ancient Egyptian and described her experiences in ancient Egypt, many of which have been checked out on, you know. And the language experts have checked her ancient Egyptian as far as they know, and they don't know too much about it. And as far as they know, it conforms to it. In her conscious waking life, she didn't know any ancient Egyptian. She claimed that she remembered a previous life in Egypt through her xenoglossy statements, you know. There are ever so many interesting books. You know, you could spend your whole term just in this. Of course, you're only getting one credit, I understand, for it, so you wouldn't want to do more than one credit is worth.
Well, maybe we've had one evening's worth already. This would be a place to stop. Any other matters we have to take care of? I did write notes to some of you because you had given me your names sometime during the last term, and I wasn't sure which ones of you were on the registration blank and which ones weren't. And some of you weren't and some were. So the ones I sent notes to should stop and see me, and I think we can straighten it out. Okay, and I guess we're going to assemble Mr. Johnson over here, Mr. Anderson here in the middle, and I'll be over on this other side.